nation commemorates the 78th anniversary of Indonesia's independence, a result of years-long struggle by the nation's independence fighters, and peaked with the symbolical proclamation of the country's independence by a duet of proclaimers, Soekarno and Mohammad Hatta. The latter might not be the prominent public speaker of the duo, and in fact, he is very well known to be much more reserved and also soft-spoken than that of the first president. But our first vice president's place in the history of our nation was as pivotal, and his influence as lasting. To get further understanding of the role and contribution of Mohammad Hatta during the independence struggle and the early years of the country's founding government, we will now talk with the eldest daughter of Mohammad Hatta, Ibu Meutia Hatta. Good day, Ibu Meutia Hatta. Thank you so much for this amazing opportunity to talk with you and to learn from you about the history of our nation through the life journey of your father, Mohammad Hatta.
Yes, thank you very much also. It's a pleasure for me to give some information about him, even though maybe many people have known him, but there's always something to be told, especially for a generation of this country.
That is exactly why we cherish this opportunity to talk with you, Ibu Meutia. Now, Ibu Meutia, as you said, for most of us Indonesians living today, we know of Mohammad Hatta from the history books. We know him as one of the proclaimers of our independence, as one of the brightest minds in the resistance of colonialism, and a very respected intellectual in the struggle to keep our fragile independence. But right now, we would love actually to learn from you, Ibu. How was Mohammad Hatta as a father, and how did you see him growing up?
Okay, actually, every child in the whole world, when he or she is treated well by the father, or always think that the father, everyone's fathers is the best. His or her father is the best in the world. So I feel also like that because my father is very kind. Also, he treated my mother and the three of us, the daughters, my two younger sister and myself, in a very kind way. He established a family, a solid family. Okay. So when we enter this house, it's just a family house, not frightening things or so. We always happy in this in the household, and we have many things to staying together. But when I read many books about him, and also my own experience to see him as a person, especially his activities outside the house. He's a real leader, a great leader, who is very. So my father is very gentle person, but he loved the country and the people so much. So he's a tough leader for the independence of the country. So I felt happy and proud of him, to have him as my father.
Thank you, Ibu, for sharing with us that very personal point of view of the great Mohammad Hatta. Now, as you must know, as your whole family must know, our nation is very proud of our founding fathers, who not only boldly and assertively proclaimed our independence, but also subsequently became the first state leadership duet of President Soekarno and Vice President Mohammad Hatta. Now, we are familiar with the images of our great leaders with their unique strengths and individual characteristics. President Soekarno was the confident speaker, the uniter of the country, and Vice President Hatta was the quiet observer, formulating the plans and the path of a young country. Now, Ibu, from your perspective though, how do you find the role of your father in the independence struggle, and that as the first vice president of our country?
Yeah, what you said is true, that both of Bung Karno and Bung Hatta had their own way to approach the people, but they have the solid and the same ideas about the people of Indonesia and the country. They love them. They wanted to have Indonesia to be a developed country, not only underdeveloped country, but and also very respected by the international relations with other countries. So, but also I agree that what you have thought, that Bung Karno was a person who liked to be in the circle of the people, especially from the low class people. Communicating with him is very excellent at that. But it didn't mean that my father, Bung Hatta, were not close to the people. Instead, he also had the mind, but he put it in his heart. So every time, I think when he woke up every day, he always think about the people first, not only himself. What do I have to do for the people? And he studied since the age of 19. He went to Rotterdam, the Netherlands, because he was the grandson of a merchant in Sumatera Barat, Bukit Tinggi. And you know that at that time only nobilities and rich merchants, wealthy merchants, could enjoy the higher education, but not the people, common people. So my father was sent by the grandfather to study at the University Rotterdam's Handelshogeschool at that time. The aim was to continue the business of the grandfather, because his father already died when he was only 8 months old, my father. So the grandfather wanted him to be his successor. But then he saw in Holland that injustice for the people, Hindia Belanda, the Indonesia at that time, Netherlands, Indies. So he wanted to be a person who fought for the independence of the country. And he was influenced by all the older people, Indonesian leader at that time, actually prominent figures at that time, like Dr. Sutomo, who built the Budi Utomo, and also Ki Hajar Dewantara, something, and then also my father and his younger friends, Indonesian friends, who studied also in Holland. They have the idea that they have to be Indonesia had to be an independent country later on. So this is his turning point. He didn't want to be a merchant, but he wanted to be a political leader. But actually not politics, but he wanted to do something that Indonesia should be having its independence.
Wow. So from an early age, he had a vision for Indonesia, and he made it happen.
Right,
with the proclamation of our country. Yes. I completely agree with you, Ibu Meutia. Although maybe most Indonesians know President Soekarno as the great orator, but actually it was Bung Hatta who represented Indonesia in many high-level international meetings to get the international communities to accept Indonesia's independence.
And at that time, he also, as a student, he followed the international student meetings, seminars or something like that. And he got to know like Jawaharlal Nehru, later become the Prime Minister of India, one of his best friends, and also many other friends, and also he saw and got to know the prominent figures at that time in social and political organizations. Then he also keep at that time he kept my father kept the acquaintance, so that when he became the vice president, Bung Hatta, and he could reach Prime Minister Nehru at that time. Okay. So they established, and so the international relations between these two people and also the other ones, students at that time, is established. So he knew what is important for an independent country, especially those Indonesia and other countries who were conquered by colonialism. Yes. That's why this is why Bung Hatta later after in fighting for the independence, after being exiled in Bovendigul and Banda Neira, he went to Jakarta, and they follow BPUP KI. Yeah. It is a Badan Persiapan for the independence of the country. Then he worked hard for the several paragraphs of the intended paragraph of the Constitution, Indonesian Constitution.
Okay. Yeah. Ibu Meutia, we've learned so much already about Bung Hatta, and we will talk more, especially about his lasting legacies. But before that, we're going to take a short break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our special dialogue for the independence of Indonesia with my very special guest, Ibu Meutia Hatta, the eldest daughter of Muhammad Hatta. Ibu Meutia, I would love to continue our discussion about the legacies of Bung Hatta. Now, Muhammad Hatta is known as the originator of a number of maklumat or announcements that laid the foundation or democratic governance system in the country. And this includes on the establishment of KNIP, the foundation for the establishment of MPR DPR, and also the establishment of political parties. Now, I would like to know, maybe you have more background stories on these maklumats that your father released.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Indonesia is a country based on democracy. In line with that, Vice President Hatta introduced a decree, maklumat, on the 16th of October 1945, known as Maklumat X. Maklumat X is a legal base to establish their duties to the country. What I mean is that because of all the political streams were accommodated, then they should be ready to respond in sending each of their representative to work in the legislative working body, BPKNIP, Badan Pekerja Komite Nasional Indonesia, pusat, as you said before, the DPR. people's representative. It serves as the people's representative, and a political community had the obligation to put Indonesian people's livelihood as their main concern. So whoever joined the BPKNIP, they have the responsible of that. Then all political streams activities must work to materialize the aim of the national independence, which is to establish the social welfare for the whole people of Indonesia. So this is what they have to do.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe I should tell a little bit about why is it called Maklumat X.
Yes.
Yeah.
Until now, we know it as Maklumat X.
Yeah.
What is the X actually, Ibu?
Yeah, Maklumat X is a statement of Bung Hatta in Malang in response, actually, further before that, the people asked whether they can have they can have the trip kind of way to be more active, not only the assistants of the presidents, they have their own duties.
Okay, to be more independent than the executive power.
Yeah,
okay.
and this is executive and
legislative.
Legislative. But then they consider themselves not in full activities, not perform fully. That's why they need to have a working body, Badan Pekerja, KNIP, and President and Vice President agree, and Vice President Hatta make it in a statement, a decree called Maklumat, because the number, serial number, the book about serial number is left in Jakarta.
Okay.
So they have to make it X, which to be fulfilled later. Because what is the serial number for this statement of Vice President?
Okay.
Actually, the name is Maklumat Wakil Presiden, means the Vice President's decree.
Yeah.
Yeah. But put it X, it means like today is maybe dots.
Dots, to be filled later.
Yeah, to be filled later.
Because we don't know the details yet, so let's just mark this with an X, which is like a reminder. Later to fill it with the actual serial number.
So it means that Vice President accept the rearrangement of the what you call that working the structure.
Okay.
The structure. So they were so happy, and all the people are so happy. Then they forgot. They just put it Maklumat X, and it is difficult to return to find later. So they don't need that. Just make it the name Maklumat X, but not X in a,
not just like a symbol.
But not X like huruf besar. What's it called?
Capital X.
Capital X. But X little X.
And the X stayed until now.
Yeah.
So
maybe now because they don't understand, they put it X like 10 Roman.
Like Roman 10 Roman numerals.
Yeah. So it's a different kind of interpretation, but actually X a little X to be filled.
Oh wow.
This is unique.
Yes,
very
indeed.
unique. And it was in the 16th of October, 1945. And then people also need to have political party. Parties. It is later, and the Maklumat Wakil Presiden also on the November 3rd, 1945, also make in the Maklumat X also, they agree, the government agree to accept political parties, but
okay.
under restriction,
Oh.
which means that I already told,
Yeah.
all the political streams, they have to work according to their own jobs.
Yeah.
So when they come into the BPKNIP, like the people's representative later on, but they have to know what is their duties.
Yeah.
This is to maintain the social welfare of the people. So each of them, because political streams are from different organizations, like the religious group,
Okay.
like Nahdlatul Utama,
Yeah.
Muhammadiyah, and also from different like parties like PNI, Partai Nasional Indonesia, and many others from the Christian groups, from the other groups. So they have to have their duty, and they have to work in the establishment of the Badan Kerja, the KNIP. They have to work for the welfare of the people. So this is the restriction. They can join, but they have to take care of the people in their own perspective and duties, together with the executive.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one last question before we go into another break, Ibu Meutia. You mentioned several times how your father always put forward the welfare of the people.
Yes.
Now, Muhammad Hatta is known in Indonesia as the father of cooperatives. In fact, that is one of his strongest legacies that still exists today in Indonesia. Maybe you can share with us, did you have like any talks or discussions with him about why he thought that cooperatives is actually the best mechanism that can serve the people of Indonesia at that time?
Bung Hatta studied in Europe, especially in Netherlands, but he also traveled to Denmark, to other countries in North Europe, and he learned about communism. He learned about capitalism
and socialism.
Socialism in his in the campus.
Okay.
But what is unique from Bung Hatta, he did not become astonished with the theories, great theories, because there he could read the book by Lenin, about Lenin, also about capitalism, and many things, Adam Smith, many books about it. But what is, for me, what is unique is because my father learn and think whether these theories suitable for Indonesia or not.
Okay.
Yeah. But he reached the conclusion that not capitalism or communism, both of them did not suitable for Indonesian people, because Indonesian people, multicultural people of Indonesia, they have mostly the principle of togetherness, gotong royong, mutualism, brotherhood, mutualism. So it is reflected in how they establish the fields, sawah, the kampungs, the villages, and also people's house. They work together, and also many other things.
And communities,
unity,
and all sorts of livelihoods throughout Indonesia.
Yes. Musyawarah mufakat is reflected in also in the archaeological things. I mean, artifacts.
Okay, so even archaeological findings also shows that the Indonesian people have always been based on musyawarah mufakat.
Like the stones for musyawarah,
Interesting.
under the sky, yeah, and also the ballet adat later on,
Yeah.
and people can hear what the leaders talk about. This is welfare of the people. So Bung Hatta said the most important thing is how to work together, cooperation. Cooperative means to work together.
Okay.
And this is also already in the heart of the people, in the soul of the people. So they think that every time, I mean every culture, it is found in their livelihood and also in the way of life of the people. So Bung Hatta said we have to have a certain economic system which is established the welfare of the people is by respecting the people and use their properties to be put in the national economic system.
I see.
Yeah,
so they feel that they also contribute to the economic growth of the young country at that time.
At that time it was still not yet freedom. We were not the independence of Indonesia is not yet accepted. I mean, fought yet. But this is the idea of Bung Hatta. When Indonesia got this independence, then they have the people. This is a national economic system should be based on people's welfare, using the property of the people that inherited by from their ancestor, and also they can work in the factories. And so the way is a cooperative. Cooperative is the Soko Guru is the main activities for that.
And again, his vision proved to be right. It is still widely used.
Because in capitalism, the people will be crushed.
That's true.
Yeah.
And we've seen this in other parts of the world as well.
Yes.
Ibu Meutia, I think so far our discussion has delighted history buffs. You've provided us with so many background stories, behind the scenes, and also fun facts about some of the most prominent historical moments in Indonesia. So after the break, I would love to take us back to the present and talk about how we can learn from the legacy of Bung Hatta.
Okay.
We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Thank you.
Back to my discussion with Ibu Meutia Hatta, the eldest daughter of Muhammad Hatta. Ibu Meutia, we now continue our discussion. I still actually want to talk about your father's most lasting legacy, which is the bebas aktif foreign policy of Indonesia, which is still held until today. That is actually the main principle of Indonesia's international relations. And I would just want to know, maybe you know something about why your father put forward this idea to be the principles of Indonesia's relationship with other countries, especially at that time in the late 40s and early 50s.
Yes. Yeah. Should we go back to the history of how we got our independence?
Yeah.
We proclaim, Soekarno and Hatta proclaims the independence without the help of other countries. So meaning that we didn't get our independence from one
from the one who colonized us. It was not given to us.
Not given to us. Yes, but we fought for our independence, and even when after proclaiming the independence in 17th of August 1945, the Dutch did not like it, and also
we still had to fight a few years after that.
A few years. roundtable
Yes.
conference.
Yeah,
Also, my father, Bung Hatta,
exactly.
fought for it, and
Yeah.
we got our independence accepted by
Yeah.
the
That is actually
nation.
how we got our independence accepted
yeah.
by the international community,
international community.
by the brilliance of your father who represented Indonesia so well in those meetings.
Actually, I could also show many of his strategies
Okay.
to get it, like the PMI, Palang Merah Indonesia.
That's right.
On the 16th of September, just 1 month after the independence, my father established, of course, Bung Karno also, the
Yes.
president. But vice president become the head of the PMI.
Okay.
Why? Because Dutch had not accept us, our independence, but then how to get to the international community, Palang Merah International.
Yeah. Okay.
Palang Red Cross.
Yeah.
So if we enter, we became the member of the International Red Cross, then we are acknowledged as a country. And
Okay.
then
So it was a strategy.
Yes, a
to go into
strategy.
the international community.
Yes. So
Okay.
vice president become the head of the PMI.
Okay.
So we got the chance to participate in the activities, humanitarian activities that the Dutch were at that time captive by the in the camp by the Dutch.
Okay.
Could be sent to their country,
Okay.
especially the women and children. So this is the role of Indonesia as a member of the Red Cross.
Oh wow.
Even though the Dutch as our
colonialists at that time.
they did not accept the independence of Indonesia.
Okay.
So after it was established like that, my father gave it to the Dr. Buntaran, which is the Minister of Health at that time. So he did not keep.
Yeah, he didn't continue the role of being the. Okay.
That's his strategy. It's very smart strategy of Bung Hatta.
I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah, and then also, that's many things. Back to the
Bebas aktif foreign policy.
In 1948, Bung Hatta introduced to the BPKNIP also and the other groups that we have our independence not given by any country.
Yes.
Then we have to keep our independence, and we have to be strong and tough, not to get involved or become the subject of either West or
not to be a proxy of any side.
At that time, it's the West and East and West. Not the American or Soviet Union.
Because of what happened after World War II, right? The world was divided. The geopolitical landscape was West against East, and each side was actually like collecting supporters, and that's why Indonesia thought we should remain independent, and that's why the Bebas Aktif.
In his speech in September 1948, Bung Hatta said, we have to go straight with our schedule, our ideas, our goals, and then it is like rowing between two tough rocks. So we have to not to bump into the any of the rocks. We have to go straight.
Not to be deterred, keep firm, and stay true to our ideals and our philosophies.
And then his concept is taken by the Bebas Aktif politik, Bebas Aktif in our Kemlu. And then also it was developed later in the non-aligned movement by President Soekarno. So it is
Yeah.
until now.
It's a
we should be-
continuation of that.
Yeah, we should be continue to be bebas aktif
Yes.
in the policy.
Okay, wow,
Yeah.
wonderful. Ibu Meutia, I now want to touch upon the subject of your father's personal relationship with President Soekarno.
Yeah.
We know that they are quite different in many ways, and
Yeah.
they're also quite outspoken about their differences from
Yeah.
styles of governing, in their opinions of governance systems, but they had remained good friends
Yes.
until the end of their lives. And their
Yeah.
solid friendship, despite their differences, have set a high standard in
Yeah.
human relations in the world of
Yeah.
politics. Now, Ibu, what do you think we
Yeah.
can learn from the friendship of Bung Karno and Bung Hatta,
Yeah.
especially if we compare it now to the turbulent eras of modern politics in Indonesia, and especially for the young people watching who may not be so caring about the world of politics, or
Yeah.
even maybe the other spectrum care so much because they're going to be first-time voters in the upcoming election. What do you think, Ibu?
Yeah. Especially first about Bung Karno and Bung Hatta.
Yeah.
Actually, in the period of 1960 to 65,
Okay.
it is not a good relation. I mean, they were separated
Yeah.
by politics.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Bung Karno had the confidence, his
Okay.
confidence that
Yeah.
he could manage, he could conquer,
Yeah.
on quotation,
Yeah.
conquer the ideas of the people, the groups,
Yeah.
because he's the pemimpin besar revolusi.
Yeah.
So my father said, it is not like that. You have to be careful,
Yeah.
because it's difficult to consider them as same, with the
Yes.
same ideas, or they could not like water and oil could
cannot
not
mix, cannot be mixed.
mix. Yeah. So you have to be careful about that, and also, of course, he explained what is it.
Yeah.
But when my father didn't like the policies of Bung Karno, he just very quiet. But one of the books, Demokrasi Kita, is a booklet
Okay.
talk about what should be, what has happened, and what should be made to repair the
Okay.
problems, to the damage.
Yeah.
Then he said, it's difficult to convince Bung Karno
Yeah.
to be careful with his idea,
Okay.
and it is proven
Yeah.
in 1966 and
Yes.
so on. So actually they were separated, but the heart is always
Yeah.
in Bung Karno, until Bung Karno was severely ill.
Yeah.
Almost at the last.
Yeah. Last moment of his
last
life,
moment of his
on his
life.
deathbed, I think.
Yes.
Right.
And then my father asked President Suharto whether President Soekarno should be taken to the hospital.
Yes.
Yeah, and right away that day,
Yeah.
he was taken to the Gatot Subroto
Okay.
hospital. And then Bung Hatta, my father, asked also whether I could see him. Then President Suharto didn't reply the letter,
Okay.
but sent at that time Governor Cokro Pranolo, at that
Okay.
time the Sekretaris Militer,
Okay.
President, said, came here to say, Bung Hatta, let's go to the hospital now, he said. And
Okay.
I also follow, and my sister Gumala.
Okay.
And we saw the last time of Bung Karno and Bung Hatta. They could not speak much,
Yeah.
talk much, because he was very ill.
Okay.
But they see each other caressing hands. Bung Hatta carries the hands of arms,
Yeah.
both arms of Bung
Yes.
Karno. And
Showed
also
affection.
affection,
Yeah.
yes, and is Bung Karno asked who had met you in Dutch, means who are you? And well, it is hard to say, oh, you look good. No, he's not good. So difficult to set, but they talk in heart maybe by caressing little. And Bung Karno also shed a little tears. But my father very sad, but he didn't cry. But they talk. Both of them very tough persons. So that's the last time of them together.
Meeting each other.
Mostly talk in heart.
Although not many words were spoken between them, but they could really feel the love and respect that they've had for each other, even at that moment.
Yeah, because Bung Karno also think Bung Hatta is the last one who came to see me. Because he's already exiled actually. It's very sad. Even I could not speak. I feel not proper to talk, to interfere. I just stand like that. I don't know what to do. Also my sister and also the secretary of my father, Pak Wangsa, and also Sekmil Cokro Pranolo. And Bung Karno asked for his glasses to the nurse to be put to see my father better. But it's already swollen. Well, it's hard to and sad to.
It's heartbreaking. Must be very heartbreaking.
Well, he is the one. He was the one who put my ari-ari is a what you call it umbilical cord to be buried in the garden. Because my father thought it's a cultural. I have to go to the sidang cabinet, cabinet meeting. So I don't want to just my father-in-law just do it. He's a Javanese. But Bung Karno said, okay, you just go to the sidang cabinet and I buried your daughter's millennial cord. So ari-ari. So it's very close. Personally, it's very close. But Bung Karno and Bung Hatta, like I said, they have the same ideal to see Indonesia big, respected by the whole world. In the United Nations countries gathering, but they're different. Bung Karno put more in politics, but the Bung Hatta have a better observation about the unwelfare of the at that time the economic unwelfare. But then we realized we can understand. At that time Bung Karno put more focus on things that not suitable for the not the right policy at that time. And Bung Hatta said cooperative movement should be taken care and established and to be run, but it didn't work. Then afterward, the capitalism came. So, like I said, Bung Hatta see whether this theory is good or not to Indonesia. But maybe younger scholars think, oh, this is due from abroad. We should put it in Indonesia. No, this is the difference between Bung Hatta and the younger scholars. And now, even now, is a new generations. It is actually the grandson and daughters of Bung Hatta. So this generation, the generation Z, should be careful. Millennial and Z should be careful because Bung Hatta said the most important thing is because we are a multicultural society, we have to be together.
Be united.
tolerate or respected other people's cultures, but we have to be together for our country. So this is going to be the political year now, starting already. But we should stop the like that. What kind of it's called
animosity and quarreling between the parties, because
and also in social media should make it less, and we have to concern to be together, to think together how to manage if we still have problems with our ecology, our economic system. Capitalism is harder and harder, but make a difficult situation for the people like that who lost the job, and who could not even. There are new kind of strategy to after the COVID-19, but it is also felt by us, but new strategy had not been fruitful for different groups. For other groups, maybe it is okay, but for the other unfortunate groups, so we have to be together, to help together, and have the same concern.
That's a great reminder, Ibu. Thank you so much. For a lot of us, it's easy to take it for granted, all the luxury and comforts that we have now compared to what the independence fighters had to go through during our independence. Although we do have our own fights now in the modern world, and we still have to put forward that love of the nation to make sure that everything we do is actually for the benefit of the people, for the whole of Indonesia.
We have to appreciate and be thanks to God. We have to praise God that we have the modern technology, the digital technology, which helps us many things, but also the bad part, the ugly part of the
digital technology and social media, how they can be used to divide us instead of uniting us.
But we have to try how to make it useful for the whole people, and also avoid crash and conflicts. And then I think when I saw my father, he always think about every day, what do I have to do for my country and my people. But most of the people now who is in the authority have the pejabat, authority of the, like in the province, in the national levels, they think about what can I grab from the country for myself.
Unfortunately, so
so it should be demolished. Think they maybe they have good ideas, but it is only for a little restricted group, but not for everybody. So what we think, we have to think about how Indonesia is to be enjoyed with the welfare of the people. Not every one is always, when he was born, he's very poor, but after not to be poor until his death. So this is what we have to do for our country, especially the unfortunate people.
Thank you so much, Ibu. That's a great reminder, especially for our young viewers who we hope can continue the legacy of building Indonesia to its most potential.
The life, the love for the people and our country, pride for our country, it should be given through the education system, not only in the school, but also for the society, education for the society as well.
Okay, so a lot of homework, but also a lot of potential.
Yes, yes.
Ibu Meutia Hatta, it's been nothing but delightful to talk with you. Thank you so much for giving us a peek to your window of memories of the life journey of your father. We
thank
truly
you.
appreciate the chance of visiting you here in your childhood home,
Yes.
where Muhammad Hatta also lived.
Yeah.
So this is a very precious opportunity ahead, and of course we hope that Muhammad Hatta's lifelong devotion to his country and its people will always serve as inspiration. And to you, we wish you the best of health and happy independence.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you,
The
Ibu Meutia.
78th.
Yes, 78th
independence.
anniversary of our country's
Yeah.
independence, and I'm so glad to